April 8, 1943. German pilots circling 27,000 feet above France started laughing. They couldn't believe what the Americans just sent to fight them. Fat, slow, ugly. They called them flying milk bottles. 18 months later, those same Germans were begging their commanders to never put them against this aircraft again. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt looked like a joke when it first appeared over Europe. It weighed as much as 2 normal fighters. It couldn't turn, it couldn't climb. German aces with hundreds of kills thought it would be target practice, but they didn't know what was hidden in those thick wings. 8 .50 caliber machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, and a fire rate that could cut a plane in half in under 2 seconds. This is the story of how American engineering turned mockery into absolute terror. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermican was smirking inside his Focke-Wulf 190 cockpit that April morning. He'd been flying combat missions since 1940. Poland, France, Britain, Russia. He'd seen it all, shot down dozens of enemy aircraft, survived when most of his friends hadn't. And now he was watching 16 American fighters struggling to climb toward his formation like fat kids trying to run up a hill. The P-47 Thunderbolt. That's what the Americans called it. Hermican called it something else, a flying bathtub. The thing was massive, absolutely huge compared to every other fighter in the sky. The fuselage looked like someone took a normal fighter and inflated it with an air pump. The wings seemed too small for that enormous body. And that propeller, it was bigger than anything the Luftwaffe had. Hermican keyed his radio. "They've sent us flying milk bottles. This will be easy." His wingman laughed. Other pilots in the formation were making jokes. The Americans had been hyping up this new fighter for months, claiming it was going to change everything. And this is what showed up. This corpulent monster that looked like it belonged hauling cargo, not fighting. But here's what Hermican didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves could have possibly imagined. They were looking at the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these objects of ridicule would become the most feared aircraft in German skies. The sound of their guns would make veteran pilots physically sick with fear. And Germany would lose over 15,000 aircraft trying to stop what they'd laughed at. Let's go back to understand how this happened. June 1940. France was falling. German Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s were dominating European skies. The U.S. Air Corps looked at what was happening and panicked. They needed a high-altitude interceptor, something that could match the best fighters Germany had. They went to Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born designer working for Republic Aviation. Kartveli's team came back with something that shocked everyone. The XP-47B prototype weighed 9,900 pounds empty. That's 65% heavier than the fighter it was replacing. When test pilots first saw it sitting on the runway, they all asked the same question. This thing actually flies? And it did fly. But it flew weird. Really weird. The P-47 had this massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. 18 cylinders arranged in a radial. 2,000 horsepower. More power than entire bomber formations from World War I. But all that power came with problems. The thing torqued rolled on takeoff if you weren't careful. It ground looped on landing. And when you put it into a dive, it dove so enthusiastically that the controls would freeze up as you approached the speed of sound. Major Hubert Zemke was put in charge of training the 56th Fighter Group on these things at Bridgeport, Connecticut. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots, 41 aircraft destroyed. Training accidents. The P-47 was killing more Americans than it would kill Germans in its first months of combat. Zemke hated it. His pilots hated it. They wanted Spitfires, light, nimble, proven. Instead, they got this 7-ton monster that felt like flying a locomotive. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm kid from Oklahoma, described his first flight like this. It was like strapping yourself to a freight train. You didn't fly it, you aimed it and held on. But there were hints, small things that suggested this aircraft was different. A P-47 crashed during training and the pilot walked away without a scratch. The aircraft had hit the ground at over 200 miles per hour, bounced, cartwheeled, and came apart. The cockpit section stayed intact. The armor plating behind the pilot's seat didn't even bend. Another training incident. A pilot accidentally flew through a thunderstorm at 30,000 feet. Lightning struck the aircraft. The electrical system went haywire, but the engine kept running. The pilot flew home. Mechanics counted 7 separate lightning strike points on the airframe. On any other fighter, that would have been catastrophic. The P-47 shrugged it off. April 1943. The 4th and 56th Fighter Groups deployed to England with their Thunderbolts. The British took one look at them and were polite enough not to laugh out loud. RAF pilots flying Spitfires privately told the Americans they might want to reconsider. One British squadron leader was quoted saying, "The Americans have built a wonderful aircraft for hauling flight. Pity they're trying to use it as a fighter." The first combat missions confirmed every fear. The P-47s couldn't turn with German fighters, couldn't climb with them at medium altitude. When Focke-Wulf 190s bounced them from below, the heavy Thunderbolts wallowed like boats in rough water. German pilots quickly figured out the tactics. Attack from below, forced turning fights. The fat Americans couldn't compete. Hauptmann Josef Pips, Priller, commanded Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter wings. After his first encounter with P-47s, he sent a report to headquarters. The statistics backed him up. First month of operations, 14 Thunderbolts lost, 3 confirmed German kills. The ratio was terrible. American pilots were getting shot down at nearly 5-to-1. Some units were talking about refusing to fly the P-47, demanding different aircraft, anything else. But something strange was happening that German intelligence wasn't noticing. The P-47s that did get shot down had absorbed incredible amounts of damage before falling. One aircraft returned from a mission on May 4th with 21 cannon holes and 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have turned a Messerschmitt into confetti. The P-47 flew home, landed, was repaired, and flying again 3 days later. And when Thunderbolts got their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The German pilot named Unteroffizier Klaus Mietusch survived an encounter and reported, "I saw the American fire at Werner from perhaps 400 meters. Werner's aircraft didn't catch fire, didn't smoke. It simply came apart. The wings separated, the tail broke off, the fuselage split open. In 1 second, a fighter became scrap metal falling from the sky." The 850 caliber Browning machine guns weren't like anything the Germans had faced. Most fighters carried cannons with limited ammunition, maybe 120 rounds, 200 if you were lucky. The P-47 carried 3,400 rounds total, 425 rounds per gun. At convergence distance around 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a killing zone about 6 feet in diameter. Do the math. That's 100 half-inch projectiles per second hitting a target area the size of a compact car. Each bullet traveling at 2,900 feet per second, each one capable of punching through armor plating. The ammunition load mixed armor-piercing incendiary rounds with tracer and ball rounds. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum, hot enough to melt steel. But here's what started changing everything. The P-47 pilots were learning fast. Major Hub Zemke figured out the secret through brutal trial and error. He called his pilots together after losing 2 more aircraft in turning fights. "Stop trying to fight like they fight," he told them. "This isn't a Spitfire. It's not supposed to be a Spitfire. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns." See, the P-47's massive weight was actually a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could reach 550 miles per hour. Faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a vertical dive. That speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind, gasping for air. Captain Walker Bud Maharan developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Instead of traditional dogfighting, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet or higher, way up where the air was thin and cold. German fighters using mechanical superchargers struggled at that altitude. Their engines gasped, performance degraded. They became sluggish. The Thunderbolts would wait up there like eagles watching mice. When German fighters appeared below, attacking bomber formations, the P-47s would roll inverted and dive, building speed, massive speed. By the time they reached the German formations, they'd be going so fast that deflection shooting was basically impossible for the defending Germans. Then, those 8 guns would open up. German pilots described it as facing a wall of lead. You didn't see individual bullets. You saw a solid stream of fire converging on your aircraft. If you were caught in that stream, you had maybe half a second before your plane disintegrated. Not caught fire, not damaged, disintegrated. Turned into aluminum confetti tumbling through the sky. June 26, 1943. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson was flying with the 61st Fighter Squadron. His formation got bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwadron 26. The Germans executed a perfect attack. Diving from the sun, overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear, got caught in crossfire from multiple attackers. 2 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere. The engine cowling tore away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson took shrapnel in his nose and leg. He tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next became legendary on both sides. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, an engine that was shaking itself apart, and controls that barely responded, Johnson leveled the aircraft and pointed it toward England. The P-47 kept flying with damage that should have reduced it to falling debris. Then, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 found him. Some German pilot from JG-26. History never definitively identified who. This pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson couldn't evade, couldn't fight back, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The German emptied his entire cannon ammunition load into the P-47, then repositioned and fired his machine guns. The Thunderbolt absorbed everything, still flew. The German pilot pulled alongside. Johnson could see his face clearly through what was left of his canopy. Young guy, blonde. His expression went from confident to confused to something like fear. The German repositioned again, emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside one more time, shook his head, gave an informal salute, and flew away. Presumably out of ammunition and completely bewildered. Johnson's P-47 made it back to Manston Airfield in England. The engine quit on the runway. Mechanics stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. Control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural spine of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet, it brought him home. Word of Johnson's survival spread through both air forces like wildfire. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they'd accidentally built something nearly indestructible. German intelligence receiving combat reports initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But multiple pilots confirmed the story. The Thunderbolt had taken everything their best fighter could deliver and survived. The psychology started shifting. By July 1943, more American pilots were figuring out the boom and zoom tactics. They stopped trying to turn with German fighters, started using altitude advantage, started using their speed. And those 8 guns started racking up kills. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8 guns converging, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half. The tail section fell one way, the nose and cockpit another. The pilot never had a chance to react. August 17, 1943. The dual raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The deepest penetration into Germany attempted so far. Major David Schilling led the 62nd Fighter Squadron. They encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft. These were twin-engined heavy fighters designed to attack bombers with cannons and rockets. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Hinrich Hoth, a gunner in one of the Me-110s who survived, was interrogated later. His account was chilling. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw strikes on the leader's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage. The tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing but falling debris. 8 Me-110s destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. See, here's what made the P-47's guns so devastating. Each gun carried 425 rounds. That's 3,400 rounds total. The ammunition weighed nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' paths intersected. Anything in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was advanced. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds used a delayed action fuse. The bullet would penetrate the target before the incendiary charge ignited. German 20mm cannon shells, while bigger, often exploded on surface contact. Spectacular, but sometimes superficial damage. The American rounds punched through and burned from the inside. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved with altitude, while German fighters suffered. That turbo-supercharged engine maintained full power up to 30,000 feet. German fighters using mechanical superchargers saw massive performance drops above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp was one of Germany's top aces. 206 victories, a veteran of every front. On October 8, 1943, he led Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen. His Focke-Wulf 190 was sluggish, unresponsive. The BMW 801 engine was gasping in the thin air. When P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the Germans were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot, spotted Phillips' distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. His combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30 degrees deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Phillips' death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, armored deflection plates around the engine, and its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters. But everything changed in January 1944. A new variant arrived in England, the P-47D-22. It featured a hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, broad chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts climbed at 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration. P-47s could now build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11 was a veteran with over 200 combat missions. He encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. His combat diary entry: "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller changed the sound, too. The blade tips reached supersonic speeds, creating a distinctive thundering roar. You could hear it from miles away, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone. They called it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank. Range extended to over 1,000 miles, with the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded. Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate everything on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. Major Gerhard Barkhorn was one of Germany's top aces, 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front. He survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. Post-war interview: "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death. No chance to evade, no chance to survive, just sudden, violent disintegration." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. German fighters operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly. The big American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and return home. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. The Luftwaffe tried to reach the landing zones. They were massacred. Oberlieutenant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II was one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day. His report: "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, you couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain." But the real terror was just beginning, because the P-47 was about to become something even more deadly: a ground attack aircraft. The transition happened fast, with P-51 Mustangs taking over long-range escort duties. P-47 units increasingly focused on ground targets. And that's when the Luftwaffe realized something horrifying. Those 8 heavy machine guns that were devastating against aircraft were even more effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. The sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it got worse. The P-47 D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. A bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck commanded the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign. He experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them jabos, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives destroyed, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the threat: reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. Meanwhile, something impossible was happening. P-47s were catching jets. The Messerschmitt Me-262 had a top speed of 540 miles per hour. It should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters, but Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing, when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. November 27, 1944. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 356th Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report. The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 8 heavy-caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft. In January alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives destroyed, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the threat. Reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flat guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. Meanwhile, something impossible was happening. P-47s were catching German jets. The Messerschmitt Me-262 had a top speed of 540 miles per hour. It should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing, when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report? The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 8 50-caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection, boosting power to 2,800 horsepower, and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet. fast enough to intercept even jets under certain conditions. January 1st, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte. The Luftwaffe's desperate last gasp. Nearly 900 German fighters launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 Airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot was brought to the command post. He pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. Losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. See, this is what the Germans never understood. The P-47 wasn't just an aircraft. It was a symbol of American industrial might. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 Thunderbolts during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour, around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana was built from empty farmland in 1942. By 1944, it was producing 500 aircraft per month. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch. American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri alone produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by war's end. The quality showed. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They'd practiced against captured German aircraft. They knew their enemy's capabilities and limitations. They knew their aircraft systems intimately. March 1945. Oberlieutenant Josef Priller. Remember him? The guy who mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows in 1943? German propaganda officials interviewed him seeking to boost morale. His statement was deemed too demoralizing for publication. Quote, "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. German pilots who flew against P-47s developed what medical officers called jabbo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider was one of the last German pilots trained in 1945. He flew exactly 1 combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above. 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wing separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire Staffel. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The final statistics are almost unbelievable. In Europe alone, P-47s destroyed 3,752 German aircraft in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft on the ground, 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, 68,000 trucks, 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles. The 9th Air Force, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6-to-1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter-bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many fell to the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training that Germany could never replace. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former adversaries met in peace. General der Flieger Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response, recorded on video, captured the complete transformation. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter, they built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right." The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. The cockpit was comfortable. The visibility excellent. The controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns. We called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. German pilots laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. If you want to see more stories like this about weapons that changed history, hit that subscribe button. I've got more coming.